At 3 in the morning, 48 members of the most feared motorcycle gang in America showed up bleeding on a 64-year-old widow's doorstep. She had a shotgun in her hands and a loaded revolver on her kitchen table, not for intruders, but for herself. In 7 days, she planned to use it. What happened next involved a massacre on Highway 93, 23 armed killers searching her barn where wounded men held their breath in darkness, and a lie so convincing it fooled murderers into driving away. By sunrise, one man was dead in her arms. By month's end, 4,000 motorcycles would fill her fields, and the number she'd eventually paint on her barn's entrance sign, that number would haunt everyone who heard this story. The foreclosure notice had been taped to Maggie Dunning's front door for exactly 17 days. 17 days of watching that white paper flutter in the Nevada wind like a surrender flag she never agreed to raise. $320,000. That's what the bank said she owed. That's what 18 months of chemotherapy, experimental treatments, and desperate last-chance surgeries had cost. Walter had fought pancreatic cancer for 14 months with the same stubborn determination he'd applied to everything in 67 years of life. Then he lost. The medical bills arrived before the funeral flowers wilted. 7 days remained. 7 days until strangers would come and take the farm her great-grandfather had claimed in 1892. 4 generations of Dunnings, born on this soil, married on it, buried in the small cemetery behind the old oak tree. Maggie stood at her kitchen window, coffee cold in her hands, watching the sun bleed red across the desert. The color reminded her of fire, of endings. On the kitchen table lay 3 items arranged with careful precision. Her will, updated, notarized, leaving the farm to her sister in California. A letter addressed to no one, written on the same stationery she'd used to write to Jacob when he was overseas. And Walter's Smith & Wesson Model 29 revolver. The same gun Clint Eastwood made famous. The same gun Walter had taught her to shoot when they were newlyweds, laughing as the recoil nearly knocked her off her feet. She wasn't laughing now. The plan was simple. Wait until March 15th. Walk out to the family cemetery at sunset. Sit beside Walter and Jacob. And then she wouldn't have to watch strangers tear apart her home. Jacob. Her son had come home from Iraq in 2008 with a body that looked whole and a mind shattered into pieces she couldn't find, couldn't hold, couldn't glue back together. Post-traumatic stress disorder, a clinical term for the screaming nightmares, the sudden rages, the nights he spent walking the farm's perimeter with his service rifle, convinced enemies were hiding in the shadows. The night before he died, Jacob had stood in her bedroom doorway at 2 in the morning. She could see in his eyes he was asking for something, begging for something. But she was tired. So tired. Go back to bed, honey, we'll talk in the morning. There was no morning. She found him in the barn before sunrise. That was 3 years ago. The same barn that now stood silent against the darkening sky, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood. Maggie picked up the revolver, felt its weight, put it down. Not yet, 7 days. She had boxes to pack, photographs to sort, a lifetime to compress into whatever would fit in her old Ford pickup. The grandfather clock struck 9, 9 hollow chimes echoing through the empty house. It had ticked in this room for 60 years. In 7 days, strangers would carry it out. It would tick in some auction house until someone bought it for a fraction of what it was worth. Everything reduced to numbers. Everything measured in dollars. A marriage, a son, a family, a life. $320,000. Maggie sank into Walter's old armchair, the one that still smelled like tobacco and Old Spice and something uniquely him. She'd stopped washing the throw pillow, stopped washing the blanket. Foolish, she knew. The scent would fade eventually, but she couldn't speed along that particular loss. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling windows, carrying the smell of sage and dust and something metallic. A storm coming, the weatherman promised, later in the week. She didn't know it yet, but that storm would bring more than rain. It would bring 48 men on motorcycles. It would bring blood and gunfire and terror. It would bring a choice that would change everything. But that was still 6 days away. For now, Maggie Dunning sat alone in her dead husband's chair, counting down hours until she could finally stop counting. The grandfather clock ticked on. 7 days. Unless something changed. Nothing ever changed. Not anymore. The first bullet shattered Dexter Reynolds' side mirror at 11:47 p.m. The second caught Big Mike Patterson in the shoulder, nearly throwing him off his bike at 70 miles per hour. Then the desert exploded. Muzzle flashes lit up the hillside like angry fireflies. The air filled with the crack of rifles, the whine of bullets ricocheting off asphalt. Motorcycles swerved, collided, went down in showers of sparks. Men screamed. Engines roared. Blood splattered across chrome and leather. Dexter's Marine training kicked in before his conscious mind caught up. 4 years in the Corps, 2 in combat zones. His body remembered what to do when the world turned to violence. He dropped his Harley into a controlled slide, used it as cover, came up with his .45 in hand. Return fire erupted from the Angels still upright, outgunned, outpositioned, but these weren't men who surrendered. They'd fought in wars, in prisons, in bars and alleys across America. 11 minutes of chaos. Then the attackers melted into darkness. 3 hours earlier, the warehouse on the outskirts of Reno had been silent, except for the shuffle of boots and the occasional cough of men trying not to cry. Thomas Whiskey Brennan lay in a closed casket draped with the American flag. 53 years old. Founding member of the Reno chapter. Vietnam veteran. 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Silver Star. Cancer had done what enemy bullets couldn't. Dexter stood at the front, his massive frame silhouetted against candlelight. 6'4", 260 pounds, arms covered in tattoos that told his story. Marine Corps eagle on the right shoulder, Hell's Angels death head on the left. And over his heart, in Gothic script, 2 names. Emily, Sarah, his wife, his daughter. A drunk driver, a Tuesday afternoon. A phone call that hollowed him out and left nothing but rage wearing human skin. 12 years ago. He hadn't touched alcohol since. Couldn't, wouldn't, not when alcohol had taken everything. The man who killed them served 18 months. Dexter served 4 years for what he did after. Worth it? Not enough, never enough. Whiskey had been there when Dexter got out. Sponsored him back when others wanted him gone. Sat with him through those first terrible sober nights when grief came screaming back. Now Whiskey was gone too. He wouldn't want speeches, Dexter told the 47 men gathered around the casket. He'd want us to ride. Tomorrow they'd carry Whiskey's ashes to a cliffside overlooking the Pacific. His final wish. 12 hours on the highway, 48 bikes moving as one. They never made it. The ambush site. Highway 93. The Serpent Kings had been waiting. Territory, money, pride. A drug deal gone wrong 6 months back. Someone talked. The Serpent Kings blamed the Angels. They were wrong. The informant was one of their own. But blood had already spilled. 2 kings dead in Carson City. 1 angel shot in sparks. And now this. Carlos Machete Velasquez had positioned 23 men in the hills with rifles and shotguns. The plan wasn't to kill everyone. That would bring too much heat. Just wound, humiliate, send a message. Shoot out tires, put bullets in legs and shoulders, leave them stranded and bleeding. What Velasquez didn't account for was the rage of men with nothing left to lose. After the shooting stopped, 7 angels seriously wounded, 14 more with minor injuries, 23 motorcycles disabled, tires shredded, engines leaking. "Anyone got signal?" Dexter shouted, his phone showing 0 bars. Nothing. Dead zone in every sense. "We need to move." Danny Morrison, sergeant-at-arms, blood streaming from his forehead. "They'll be back, reinforcements." 30 minutes, maybe less. They got 19 bikes running. 19 bikes for 48 men, 7 who couldn't sit upright. Men piled 2 and 3 to a motorcycle, wounded brothers sandwiched between riders. They rode south because north meant Reno, and the Serpent Kings would expect them to run home. South into empty desert, into darkness, into the unknown. 14 miles later, Dexter saw lights. A farmhouse, an old barn, a gravel driveway, and on the porch, illuminated by a single yellow bulb, a gray-haired woman in a nightgown, holding a shotgun. Maggie had been dreaming of Jacob when the thunder woke her. Not thunder from the sky, thunder from the earth. A rolling, growling vibration that shook window frames and pulled her from sleep like a hand yanking her up from deep water. The clock read 3:17 a.m. Motorcycles, dozens of them, their engines screaming through the desert night. She grabbed Walter's Remington 870 and moved through the dark house without turning on lights. Lights made you visible. Lights made you a target. Through the front window, she saw them pouring onto her property like a river of chrome and headlights. Not dozens, more. Men shouting, someone screaming, one. And in the harsh glare of headlights, blood. Blood on leather, blood on chrome. Blood dripping onto her gravel driveway, black as oil in the moonlight. Maggie's first instinct was to call 911. Her second, born from 6 decades of rural survival, was recognizing that by the time any deputy reached this remote stretch of desert, whatever was about to happen would already be over. Her third instinct was the one she followed. She chambered around and stepped onto the porch. The night air hit like a slap. Cold, dry, carrying exhaust and copper and something else. The smell of wounds. The smell she remembered from Walter's final days. 48 men. She counted them quickly the way she used to count livestock. 48 men in leather vests, most bleeding, all armed, standing in her yard at 3 a.m. One stepped forward. Enormous. That was her first thought. Tall and broad, arms like tree trunks, face carved from granite. Tattoos crawled up his neck. His vest was dark with blood. He walked 3 steps before his legs gave out. She watched him crumple to the gravel. Watched him try to rise and fail. Watched him lift his head and look at her with eyes that held something she recognized. Not menace, not threat. Desperation. Please. Barely a whisper. They're coming. They'll kill us all. Please. Maggie kept the shotgun level. Who's coming? Who did this? Serpent Kings, rival club, ambush on 93. Blood bubbled at his mouth. He spit, tried again. Shot up our bikes. We got away, but they're tracking us. 20 minutes, maybe less. You want me to hide 48 men from killers? I know how it sounds. He struggled to his knees, massive body trembling. I know what we look like, what you've heard about us. He made it to his feet, swaying. But I've got 7 men who'll die tonight without help. Brothers with families. Kids waiting for them to come home. His voice cracked. I'm not asking you to trust us, I'm asking you to save us. Maggie's finger rested on the trigger guard. One squeeze and she could put this giant down. One squeeze and she could start a war she'd certainly lose. But she was looking past him now, at the others. And what she saw wasn't a gang of murderers. She saw fear. Raw, animal fear on faces that were probably usually stone. Men holding each other up. A young one cradling an arm bent wrong. An older man against a motorcycle wheel, hands pressed to his stomach, lips moving in prayer.
Men about to die. And she thought of Jacob. Jacob, who'd come home from war with that same desperate, hunted look, who'd needed someone, anyone, to see him, to save him, to hide him from the demons hunting him through the corridors of his own mind. No one had. Maggie lowered the shotgun. The barn. Everyone. Now. The giant stared. Something shifted in his eyes. Disbelief, maybe. Gratitude. Hope. The bikes, too, she continued, already moving. Everyone. Push them in, cover them with hay, make it look like nothing's here but an old woman and farm equipment. She was at the barn doors before she finished the sentence. Move. You said 20 minutes. We don't have time for thank yous. 18 minutes of controlled chaos followed. She'd never seen injured men move so fast. They pushed 600-pound motorcycles across gravel, faces contorted with pain, but hands never stopping. They carried wounded brothers in improvised stretchers. They followed her orders without question, these men who probably hadn't taken orders from anyone in years, because they understood what she understood. Life and death. The barn swallowed them. Motorcycles against the back wall, covered with tarps and hay. Wounded men in old horse stalls, out of sight. Everyone else scattered through darkness, behind equipment, under hay bales, anywhere a body could fit. The giant Dexter, she'd heard someone call him, stayed at her side despite blood dripping down his arm. "The blood in the driveway," he said. "We left a trail." Maggie was already moving. "I'll handle it. Lime from the garden shed, scattered across gravel where blood was thickest. It wouldn't fool forensics, but it might fool men in a hurry." She was finishing when she heard it. Engines, not the desperate sound of earlier. This was controlled, predatory. Headlights appeared on Highway 93, 1 mile away, one set, then another, then more. 8 vehicles, SUVs and trucks, heavy machines built for carrying men and weapons. 15 minutes, not 20. She ran to the barn, threw open the side door. Dexter was waiting, hand on his pistol. "They're here, 8 vehicles. We can fight, make a stand. With 7 men who can't walk, outgunned." She grabbed his arm. "You stay quiet. You stay hidden. Let me handle this." Handle it how? Maggie thought of the revolver on her kitchen table, the letter addressed to no one, the 7 days she had left. She thought of Jacob in this barn 3 years ago. She thought of all the ways a person could choose to die. By giving the performance of my life. She walked toward the house, picked up Walter's shotgun, mussed her hair until she looked properly deranged, and practiced the vacant smile of a woman who'd lost her mind years ago. Headlights turned into her driveway. Showtime. The first SUV stopped 30 feet from her porch. Then the second. The third. 8 vehicles in a semicircle that blocked every escape route, their headlights creating a wall of blinding white. The farmyard became a stage, and Maggie Dunning was the only performer. She squinted against the glare, one hand raised to shield her eyes, the other holding the shotgun loosely. Not threatening, not yet. Just a confused old woman woken in the middle of the night. Car doors opened, men emerged, 23. She counted as they stepped into the light. Black leather, bandanas covering faces, all armed. Pistols, rifles. One man carried a machete, its blade catching moonlight like frozen lightning. That man walked forward. Smaller than she expected, 5'8", wiry, with a face that might have been handsome once, before something twisted his mouth into a permanent sneer. Dark eyes, flat as stones at the bottom of a stagnant pond, gold teeth glinting when he smiled. "Evening, grandmother." Soft voice, almost gentle. Slight accent, Mexican maybe. "Beautiful night for a drive, yes?" Maggie let her mouth hang open, let her eyes drift past him, then back, then past him again. She'd seen enough dementia patients at the county hospital where she'd volunteered. She knew what confusion looked like. "Walter?" She made her voice querulous, uncertain. "Walter, is that you? I told you not to stay out so late. The coyotes." The man with the machete, Velasquez it had to be, exchanged glances with his men. Annoyance flickered across his face. "Not Walter, grandmother. My name is Carlos. I'm looking for friends of mine. They came this way 20 minutes ago. Many motorcycles. Very loud." Maggie tilted her head like a bird trying to remember something just out of reach. "Motorcycles? Oh yes, always motorcycles on the highway. Walter says they're going to California. Everyone's always going to California." She smiled vaguely. "I went to California once in '67. Walter took me to see the ocean. Have you seen the ocean, young man?" Rambling now, words spilling without beginning or end. She'd known women like this, watched them disappear into their own minds, one memory bleeding into the next. Velasquez's jaw tightened. "The motorcycles, grandmother, did they stop here?" "Stop here?" High, thin laugh. "Nobody stops here. Not since Walter died, not since Jacob." She let real grief flicker across her face, let her voice trail into nothing. One of Velasquez's men whispered something. Velasquez nodded, flat eyes never leaving her. "We're going to look around. Make sure those motorcycles didn't stop without you noticing. Old women miss things." 6 men peeled off toward the barn. Inside the barn, Dexter pressed his back against rotted wood, breathing through his mouth, slow, silent, the way they'd taught him in Fallujah. 47 men hidden in shadows, 7 wounded, trying not to moan. One, Dennis Hartwell, gut shot, had his hand clamped over his own mouth so hard his knuckles had gone white. Beside Dennis, Tyler Brennan was losing his battle with consciousness. His father, Mike, held him upright, whispering prayers neither of them believed. Footsteps crunching gravel outside, getting closer. Dexter's hand found his .45, 17 rounds, 23 enemies. The math was simple. The math was death. But if that old woman was buying them time, he'd be damned if he wasted it. The barn door creaked. On the porch, Maggie watched 6 armed men walking toward her barn, 6 men about to find 48 others, 6 men about to start a massacre. She had maybe 30 seconds. Wait! The word came out sharper than intended. Velasquez's eyes narrowed. She softened her voice, let it quaver. Wait, please, don't go in the barn. He raised his hand. His men stopped. Why not, grandmother? Maggie let tears well. Real tears from the bottomless well inside her. That's where I found him. Jacob, my boy. Trembling hand to her mouth. He did it in the barn 3 years ago. I can't. She was sobbing now. Great heaving sobs shaking her whole body. Please, there's nothing in there. Just his ghost waiting for me. Velasquez studied her. Behind him, his men shifted, weapons ready. Your son killed himself in that barn. Maggie nodded, unable to speak through tears. And you haven't been inside since. Another nod. Velasquez smiled, the smile of a man who'd found weakness. Then you won't mind if my men take a look, since there's nothing but ghosts. He gestured. The 6 men resumed walking. Inside the barn. Light appeared through the gaps in the wall, flashlight beams sweeping. Tyler Brennan's breathing changed. Wet, ragged, the sound of a man about to scream from pain. Mike clamped his hand over his son's mouth. Tyler's eyes went wide with agony, but no sound escaped. 3 feet away, Dennis Hartwell's grip on his own face was slipping, blood loss making him delirious. His lips were moving, forming words no one could hear. The barn door began to open. On the porch, the shotgun bucked in Maggie's hands. She hadn't consciously decided to fire. The blast tore into the night sky, buckshot spraying harmlessly into darkness 20 feet to her left. The recoil knocked her backward. She didn't fake that part, and she fell against the porch railing, still wailing, the gun slipping from her fingers. Every weapon in the yard pointed at her. 23 guns, 23 fingers on triggers. Velasquez was shouting in Spanish, his men shouting back. The 6 by the barn had spun around, attention now on the crazy old woman who'd just fired for no reason. Maggie lay against the railing, sobbing, hands pressed to her face. I'm sorry, she keened. I'm sorry, Jacob. I'm sorry. I tried to save you. Why didn't you let me save you? She was gambling everything on a simple truth. People see what they expect. They expected a gang of bikers hiding here. They expected resistance, violence. They didn't expect a grief-shattered old woman having a breakdown. Velasquez stared at her, gun still raised, finger on trigger. She could see calculation in his eyes. Kill her? Search anyway? Take time while the bikers got further away? Finally, he lowered his weapon. Crazy old woman, he muttered, then louder. Search the house, quick, then we go. Not the barn. The house. 4 men pushed past her. She heard them moving through rooms, drawers opening, furniture shoved aside. They weren't gentle. They didn't care about photographs knocked off walls or dishes broken in the kitchen. Let them break everything, she thought. Just stay out of the barn. 12 minutes. The search lasted 12 minutes of held breath and pounding heart. When it was over, Velasquez's men emerged empty-handed. Nothing. No one here but her. Velasquez walked to where Maggie sat, crouched down, his face close to hers, cigarettes on his breath and something else. Blood, maybe. You're sure you didn't see anything, grandmother? Maggie looked at him with emptied eyes. I see things all the time. Walter in the kitchen making coffee. Jacob running through the fields. My mother at the foot of my bed. Thin, broken smile. But they're never really there. Nothing's ever really there anymore. Velasquez held her gaze, then stood, brushed off his knees. We're done. They went south, toward Vegas. Move out. Engines started. Headlights swung away from the farmhouse, away from the barn, away from 48 men who had stopped breathing. Velasquez was last to leave. He paused at his SUV, looked back. I hope you find peace, grandmother, whatever ghosts you're carrying. Then he was gone. Taillights disappearing down the driveway onto Highway 93, heading south toward prey that wasn't there. Maggie sat on her porch for a long time after. Her hands were shaking, her whole body shaking. She'd lied to armed killers, fired a shotgun as a distraction, risked her life for 48 strangers. and she felt more alive than she had in 3 years. The barn door creaked open. A figure emerged. Dexter. He walked toward her slowly, carefully, pain in every step. When he reached the porch, he didn't say anything, just stood there, looking at her with eyes that had seen too much death and hadn't expected to see mercy. "They're gone," Maggie said. "I heard." He lowered himself onto the step beside her. "That thing you did with the shotgun. Stupid, reckless, insane. I was going to say brave." The cellar smelled like dust and memory. Maggie descended wooden stairs with a flashlight, Dexter's massive presence behind her. The beams swept across mason jars, peaches and tomatoes Walter had helped her can in 2009, the last summer before the diagnosis. The cabinet she needed was against the far wall. "Walter was a veterinarian before he took over the farm," she explained, pulling supplies out. "Large animals, horses, cattle, sutures, antiseptic, bandages, needles. Most of this is expired, but the basics should work." Dexter examined a bottle of veterinary-grade lidocaine. "You know how to use this?" "I was his assistant for 40 years, stitched up more cuts than I can count." Her hand rested on Walter's surgical kit. "I'm not a doctor, but I can close a wound without killing someone. Probably. Probably is better than definitely dying." The barn had become a field hospital. Someone had lit a kerosene lamp. Its yellow glow cast long shadows across the faces of men gathered inside, wounded saints in leather and denim, their blood black in dim light. 7 couldn't sit up at all. Maggie moved toward them without hesitation. Whatever fear she'd felt earlier had been replaced by something stronger, something she recognized from nights at Walter's bedside, watching monitors, refusing to let death take him without a fight. The first was Tyler Brennan, maybe 25. Baby face that hadn't lost its softness despite tattoos and leather, shot through the thigh, bullet-tearing muscle and exiting out the back. Someone had applied a belt as tourniquet, but the wound was ugly, showing signs of contamination. "What's his name?" Maggie asked, kneeling. "Tyler," his father's voice thick with tears. "Tyler Brennan. He's my son." Brennan. The same name as the man whose ashes they'd been carrying. "Your father was Thomas Brennan?" "My brother. We were taking his ashes to the coast, and now my boy." "Your boy is going to be fine." She didn't know if it was true. She said it anyway. "Hold his hand, keep him conscious." 47 minutes on Tyler. Cleaning, debriding, stitching. The lidocaine helped. His screams faded to whimpers, then drugged mumbling. Veterinary sutures weren't ideal for human tissue, but they held. "He'll need real medical attention," she told Mike Brennan. "Antibiotics, proper bandaging. But he should make it through the night." The man grabbed her hand, pressed it to his forehead, tears hot against her skin. "Thank you. Thank you, thank you." She moved to the next patient, and the next. Each wound told a story. Bullet graze across ribs, painful but superficial. Deep gash on forearm from flying glass. Dislocated shoulder requiring 2 men to hold the patient down while she manipulated bone back into socket, his screams echoing off walls before the joint popped into place. The worst was Dennis Hartwell, 43, father of 4, accountant by day. This surprised her until she remembered not everyone in a motorcycle club was a criminal. Some were just men looking for brotherhood. Dennis had been shot in the abdomen. Maggie knew enough medicine to know abdominal gunshots were death sentences without surgery. Perforated intestines, internal bleeding. Without a hospital, Dennis would die. She didn't tell anyone. She cleaned the wound, packed it with sterile gauze, wrapped his midsection, started an IV with supplies from Walter's kit, saline solution hanging from a nail in the barn wall. "Is he going to make it?" Dexter appeared beside her. She looked at Dennis's vitals, pulse weak, breathing shallow, and lied. "Until morning. That's all we can ask." Dexter nodded. He didn't believe her, but he accepted the lie because despair wouldn't save anyone. "Your turn," Maggie gestured to a hay bale. "Sit. I'm fine. You've been holding your arm against your body for 2 hours, blood soaking through your shirt. You're about to fall over." She fixed him with a look that had cowed stubborn horses and stubborn husbands. "Sit down." Dexter sat. His wounds were better than she'd feared. Bullet graze on shoulder, bled impressively but missed anything vital. Another through the fleshy part of his side, entering and exiting clean. The arm was badly bruised, not broken. She worked in silence, hands moving with efficiency that surprised even her. "You're good at this," Dexter said. "Adequate. Big difference." "Better than adequate." He was watching her face. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. When I showed up at your door, you could have called cops, could have refused, could have let the Serpent Kings find us." Pause as she pulled a suture tight. "Why didn't you?" Maggie considered the question, considered easy answers. Christian charity, human decency, all true, none complete. "My son killed himself 3 years ago, in this barn, right where we're sitting." She felt Dexter go still. "He came back from Iraq broken in ways I couldn't see. He needed help. Real help. And I didn't know how to give it." She finished the suture, reached for bandages. "The night before he died, he stood in my doorway at 2 a.m, just like you stood in mine tonight. I could see he was asking for something, but I was tired, so I told him to go back to bed." She wrapped the bandage tight. There was no mourning, not for him. Silence. The kind that fills spaces where words can't reach. "I didn't save my son, but tonight, when you showed up begging for something I actually knew how to give." She met Dexter's eyes. "How could I say no?" He didn't respond, but something shifted in his face, a crack in granite. He reached out, placed his hand over hers. "His name? Your son?" "Jacob. Jacob Thomas Dunning." "We'll remember him. The club keeps a list. Brothers lost too young for whatever reason. We read the names at every memorial." He squeezed her hand. "Jacob will be on that list. He'll never be forgotten." Something cracked inside Maggie's chest, something frozen for 3 years. "Thank you," she whispered. The barn door opened, a young prospect, nervous. "Dex, the guy with the gut wound." His breathing's changed. Maggie was on her feet in seconds, across the barn, on her knees beside Dennis. His pulse was thready, weak, fading. "Dennis, stay with me. Open your eyes." His eyelids fluttered, lips moving, forming words she couldn't hear. "He's crashing, bleeding internally. I can't—" She stopped, looked at 47 faces watching her, 47 men holding their breath. "I need a phone. We need help. Now." Dexter was already moving. "Danny, take my bike. Only one with a full tank. Ride until you get signal. Call emergency contact. Tell them medical evacuation. Tell them where we are." "Tell them to hurry," Maggie finished. "We're running out of time." Danny sprinted for the door. Seconds later, a motorcycle engine split the silence. Maggie turned back to Dennis. His skin had gone gray. "Stay with me," she whispered, taking his hand. "Help is coming." She didn't know if he could hear. She kept talking anyway. Outside, the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern horizon. Dennis Hartwell died at 4:47 in the morning. Maggie was holding his hand when it happened. One moment his chest was rising, falling, fighting. The next, stillness, profound, absolute. The stillness she'd seen twice before. Walter in the hospital, Jacob in this barn. She didn't need to check for a pulse. The barn went silent. 47 men frozen in lamplight, watching as she gently closed Dennis's eyes, straightened his vest, folded his hands across his chest. Who was his family? Her voice steadier than expected. A man stepped forward, 50s, gray mustache, tears cutting through dust. Wife named Barbara, 4 kids, Michael, Sarah, David, Emma, oldest 16, youngest 7. Maggie filed the names away, things too important to forget. Someone will need to tell them. Look Barbara in the eyes and explain why her husband isn't coming home. "I'll do it," Dexter's voice behind her. "Dennis was my responsibility. His family deserves to hear it from me. They deserve the truth, that he didn't die alone, that strangers held his hand and did everything they could." Outside, a bird started singing. Some desert species greeting dawn with a melody obscenely cheerful for the circumstances. Backup arrived at 7:43. 117 motorcycles poured onto her property. From Reno, Vegas, Carson City, Elko. Different chapters, different cities, all united under the same winged death's head. They brought medical supplies, food, water, and something else, something unexpected. Reverence. Maggie became aware of stares as she walked through the growing crowd. Men twice her size covered in tattoos, looking at her like she was something sacred. One man, bald, bearded, sergeant at arms on his vest, removed his sunglasses when she passed, like a soldier showing respect to a superior. "Mrs. Dunning," a woman's voice, heavy-set, 50s, medical bag over shoulder. "I'm Rosa, registered nurse. Dex told us what you did. I'm here to take over so you can rest." Tyler Brennan, through and through on the thigh. Veterinary sutures, but they're holding. The shoulder wound needs x-ray. And Dennis. "I know about Dennis." Rosa's hand found her shoulder. "His body will be transported with full honors. His family notified before the news gets out." Gentle squeeze. "We take care of our own, Mrs. Dunning. That includes people who take care of us." Tyler was loaded into an unmarked ambulance. Then, the others. Dennis's body handled with the reverence of a military funeral, men removing sunglasses and hats as the stretcher passed. Someone had set up a cooking station, bacon and coffee. Men lined up with paper plates, eating quickly, efficiently. A plate appeared in Maggie's hands. She didn't remember being hungry. Her body disagreed, half cleared before she realized she was eating. Dexter found her on the porch, watching organized chaos. "We're heading out, leaving 6 men as security, just in case." "That's not necessary. It's happening anyway." His voice left no room for argument. He pressed a slip of paper into her hand. "Phone number, direct line to me, day or night. You need anything, you call." Dexter. "1 month, I'm coming back. We're going to talk about that foreclosure." "The hearing's in 5 days. There won't be anything to talk about." He smiled. Strange expression on his battered face. Granite learning gentleness. "Have faith, Mrs. Dunning. Miracles happen. I saw one tonight." He reached into his vest, pulled out a small bronze chip worn smooth at the edges, a triangle in a circle, the number 1. 1 year sober. Got it 8 months after my wife and daughter died. The day I admitted drinking myself to death wouldn't bring them back. He pressed it into her palm. "Keep it. Not because you need sobriety. Because you need to remember someone survived. Someone who lost everything found new reasons." He closed her fingers around the chip. "You saved 47 lives tonight, Mrs. Dunning. Maybe it's time to save 1 more." Then he was gone. Onto his motorcycle, engine roaring to life, hand raised in farewell. The 117 motorcycles streamed back onto Highway 93, leaving Maggie alone with 6 silent guardians and a farm that suddenly felt very quiet. She looked at the chip in her hand, then at the kitchen table where the revolver still sat beside the letter addressed to no one. She walked inside, picked up the revolver, felt its weight. Then she opened the gun safe and put it away. The letter she folded once, twice, 3 times, walked to the fireplace, placed it on the cold grate. She didn't light it, not yet, but she placed it where flames could reach when she was ready. Then she went to her bedroom, lay down on the empty bed, and slept. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't dream of death. Day 1 without them felt like waking from a fever dream. Maggie stood on her porch at sunrise, coffee in hand, staring at the tire tracks scarring her property. Evidence that it had really happened, that 48 bleeding men had really hidden in her barn, that she'd really faced down killers with nothing but a shotgun and a lie. The 6 guards Dexter left behind kept their distance, 2 on property at all times, others rotating through town. She learned their names gradually. Marcus, silver-streaked beard, calm like Walter. Jimmy, young and eager, always offering to fix things. Bruno, who barely spoke but communicated volumes with his eyes. Day 3, Marcus found her in the barn. She hadn't meant to go inside. Her feet had carried her there while her mind was somewhere else. She stood in the doorway, staring at the spot where Dennis had died. The spot where Jacob had died. Same barn. Different ghosts. "Mrs. Dunning?" Marcus's voice gentle. "You okay?" "I'm standing in a room where 2 men died," she said. "One I couldn't save. One I didn't even know needed saving." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "My brother killed himself in 2004, Iraq vet like your son. I found him in his garage." Maggie turned to look at him. "For years I asked myself what I missed, what signs I should have seen, what words I should have said." He shook his head. "Never found answers, but I found something else." "What?" "People who understood. Brothers who'd lost brothers. A family that didn't need me to explain." He gestured vaguely toward the highway, toward the direction the motorcycles had gone. "That's what the club gave me. That's what you gave 47 men 3 nights ago. Understanding, without judgment. Maggie looked back at the empty barn, at the ghosts she couldn't see but always felt. I don't know how to stop asking the questions, she said. You don't. You just learn to live with not having answers. Day 7. She started cleaning the barn, not because anyone asked, not because it needed doing, but because her hands needed work and her mind needed quiet, and the only way she knew to achieve both was through labor. She swept concrete floors still stained with blood. She organized tools that hadn't been touched in years. She found a box behind the old tractor, Jacob's things, his Little League trophy, high school diploma, military medals in a velvet case. She sat on the cold floor and held each item like a relic. The bronze star. They'd given it to him for something he did in Fallujah, something he never talked about, something that lived behind his eyes every time he looked at her. I'm sorry, she whispered to the empty barn. I'm sorry I didn't know how to help you. I'm sorry I told you to go back to bed. No answer. There never was. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel like accusation. It felt like permission. Permission to grieve, permission to fail, permission to keep living anyway. She put Jacob's things back in the box, but she kept the bronze star, pinned it to the barn wall right next to the kerosene lamp. Something to remember him by, something to see every day. Day 15. Dexter hadn't called. She told herself it didn't matter, told herself she hadn't expected him to. Men made promises in moments of crisis, didn't mean anything once the crisis passed, but she kept the chip in her pocket anyway, kept touching it throughout the day, feeling the worn bronze, tracing the triangle with her thumb. Day 20. Still nothing. The foreclosure hearing was in 5 days. She'd stopped opening mail from the bank, stopped answering calls from Harold Martinez. What was there to say? The numbers hadn't changed, the debt hadn't disappeared, the farm was still slipping through her fingers like sand. She found herself in the barn again, staring at Jacob's bronze star. I tried, she told him. I tried to find a reason to stay, and I did for a little while. But reasons run out. Everything runs out. The revolver was still in the safe. The letter was still in the fireplace. She hadn't touched either one, but she thought about them, more than she wanted to admit. Day 23. Jimmy found her digging in the garden. She didn't know why she'd started. The vegetables wouldn't grow before the bank took the property, but her hands needed work, and the soil felt good between her fingers, and maybe, if she planted something, she'd have a reason to stick around long enough to see it bloom. Mrs. Dunning? Jimmy crouched beside her, young face earnest. Can I help? Do you know anything about gardening? No, ma'am, but I can dig holes. They worked in silence for an hour. Maggie showed him how to space the seeds, how deep to plant, how much water. He listened with the intensity of a student desperate to learn. My grandmother used to garden, he said eventually. Before she passed, she said it was the only thing that made sense. Put something in the ground, take care of it, watch it grow. She was right. She also said, he stopped, looked away. What? She said the garden always knows, if you're planting because you want to live or if you're planting to say goodbye. Maggie's hands stilled in the dirt. Which do you think I'm doing? Jimmy met her eyes. 22 years old, but something ancient in his gaze, something that had seen too much, too young. I think you're trying to figure that out. She looked at the seeds in the soil, at the garden that might bloom or might not, at the future that felt like a closed door she kept pushing against. Yeah, she said quietly. I think I am too. Day 27. The hearing was in 3 days. Maggie woke before sunrise, made coffee, sat on the porch watching stars fade into dawn. The same stars that had watched over this farm for 120 years. The same stars that would keep watching after she was gone. The chip was in her hand. She didn't remember taking it from her pocket. 1 year sober. Dexter had survived the worst thing a person could survive. Lost his wife, his daughter, his reason for living, and he'd found a way forward, found new family, found purpose. Could she? The question felt too big. The answer felt too far away. But she got up anyway, made breakfast anyway, worked in the garden anyway. because that's what surviving looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic revelations, just getting up, just doing the next thing, just waiting to see if the seeds would grow. Day 29. The morning of the hearing. Maggie dressed in black, the same dress she'd worn to Walter's funeral, pearl earrings from their 30th anniversary. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had aged a decade in 3 years, still standing, barely. Marcus offered to drive her to the courthouse. She accepted. The truck was nearly out of gas, and the thought of walking into that building alone was more than she could bear. "Whatever happens today," Marcus said as they pulled onto the highway, "you're not alone. You know that, right? I know you've been kind to me, all of you. I don't understand why, but I know. Because you showed us what courage looks like." He kept his eyes on the road. "Because when 48 strangers needed help, you didn't hesitate, didn't calculate, didn't ask what was in it for you." His hands tightened on the wheel. "Most people spend their whole lives never doing anything that brave. You did it at 3 a.m. in your nightgown." Maggie looked out the window at the desert scrolling past, at the land she was about to lose. "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. That's what brave is, Mrs. Dunning. Being terrified and doing it anyway." The Reno County Courthouse appeared on the horizon. Square, ugly, all concrete and efficiency. Room 314, 3rd floor. The place where 4 generations of Dunnings would end. They parked. Marcus walked her to the entrance. "I'll be right here when you come out." She nodded, squared her shoulders, walked inside. Harold Martinez was waiting outside room 314, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Maggie, before we go in, there's something you should know." "What?" "I got a call this morning from a lawyer in Las Vegas. He asked about your case, about the debt." Why would a lawyer in Las Vegas? The elevator doors opened, and Maggie Dunning's world changed forever. Leather everywhere. Dexter stepped out first, massive frame barely fitting through the doorway. Behind him, 10, 20, 30 men and women in Hell's Angels vests, boots echoing off tile like a drumbeat. They spread along the corridor, filling every inch of space. People waiting for other hearings pressed themselves against walls. But that wasn't what stopped Maggie's heart. Behind the bikers came more people, regular people, families with children, elderly couples, young professionals in suits, a woman in nurse's scrubs, a man in military uniform, medals glinting. They poured from the elevator, from the stairwell, from another elevator at the far end. Maggie counted, stopped at 200, started again, lost track. "What?" Whisper. She cleared her throat. "What is this?" Dexter reached her in 3 strides, his face different now, less battered, more rested, but eyes holding the same intensity. "I told you I'd come back, told you we'd talk about that foreclosure." "This is talking?" "This is family showing up." He gestured at the crowd still filling the hallway. "Every person here has a story. Either knows someone you saved that night, or knows someone who knows someone. Word spread. People wanted to help." Harold Martinez was staring, mouth opening and closing. "This is highly irregular. The hearing is in 20 minutes. The judge won't need to do anything." New voice. Maggie turned to find a man in an expensive suit approaching, silver hair, briefcase, face belonging in a boardroom. "Mrs. Dunning, Alexander Cross, attorney representing a consortium of interested parties." "What parties? What consortium? Perhaps we could speak privately?" The conference room was small. Table, 6 chairs. Cross on one side, Maggie across from him, Dexter standing behind her like a leather-clad guardian. Through the window, hundreds of people waited in the hallway. Cross opened his briefcase, withdrew a thick folder. 1 month ago, 48 members of the Hell's Angels were ambushed on Highway 93. They took shelter at your farm. You hid them, faced down their attackers, provided medical care with veterinary supplies. Speaking like reading a report, but eyes never leaving hers. 1 man died, Dennis Hartwell, father of 4. I remember. His wife Barbara wanted to be here, but she's home with the children. She asked me to deliver a message. He slid a handwritten note across the table. "You gave my husband 6 more hours, 6 hours where he wasn't alone, 6 hours where someone fought for him. That means everything." That will always mean everything. Maggie's vision blurred. After that night, Cross continued, Mr. Reynolds told his chapter what you'd done about the foreclosure, the debt, the other circumstances. The revolver, the letter, the plan. The Reno chapter started a collection. Each member contributed what they could. Within a week, $18,000. $18,000, more than she'd seen in years, still far short. Then the story spread. Other chapters, Vegas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Phoenix. By end of week 2, every Hells Angels chapter west of the Mississippi had contributed. $63,000. Still not, I'm not finished, Cross smiled, warm, genuine. The story didn't stop at the club. Members told families, friends, co-workers, people who'd never met a biker heard about the widow who risked everything to save 48 strangers. He pulled out another page. Small print, hundreds of names. Tyler Brennan posted about you on social media, shared 4,000 times in 24 hours. Local news picked it up, then national. By last week, your story had been viewed by over 2 million people. 2 million. Incomprehensible. Donations came from everywhere. $10 from a retired teacher in Ohio, $5,000 from a tech executive who lost his mother to foreclosure, 50 cents from a 7-year-old in Texas who emptied her piggy bank because she wanted to help the nice grandma. Cross pushed the folder across the table. Final total, as of 9 o'clock this morning. Maggie looked at the number, read it again. $412,647. That's more than enough to pay off your debt, cover legal fees on which I'm waiving, and leave you with substantial cushion for whatever comes next. Why? The word broken, fractured. Why would strangers do this? Dexter moved from behind her, crouched beside her chair, eyes level with hers. Because you cared first. When 48 strangers showed up at your door, bleeding and desperate, you didn't ask questions, didn't demand payment, you just opened the door. That's just being a decent person. No, decent people call cops and hope for the best. Decent people hide and pretend they didn't see anything. His voice firm, certain. What you did, facing killers, performing surgery with horse medication, spending 6 hours fighting for lives that had nothing to do with you, that's extraordinary. He reached into his vest, pulled out a velvet box. The club wanted to give you something. He opened it. Inside, on black velvet, a silver pin, an angel with wings spread wide holding a shield. The Guardian pin, given to civilians who've shown extraordinary courage defending the club. In our entire history, it's been awarded 11 times. His voice rough. You're the 12th. Maggie touched the pin. Cool metal, impossibly real. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept. Say you'll let us help. Say you'll stop carrying this alone. His voice cracked. Say you'll stick around, Mrs. Dunning. The world needs people like you. We need people like you. She thought of Walter's voice in her dream. Promise me you'll try. She thought of the revolver, locked away. The letter, waiting for flames. Yes, she whispered. I accept. All of it. The cheer from the hallway told her the crowd had heard. Maybe someone listening at the door. Maybe some mysterious biker communication network. Didn't matter. 4,000 voices celebrating her. The hearing lasted 6 minutes. Cross presented the check. Harold confirmed it covered the debt in full. The judge, stern woman in her 60s, stared at the crowd through the windows. Any objections? None. Case dismissed. The sound that erupted was unlike anything Maggie had ever heard. Cheering, applause, motorcycle engines starting outside, riders revving in celebration. She walked out in a daze, hands reaching for her, shaking, patting, pressing notes and cards into her palms. Faces swimming past, tear-streaked and smiling. A little girl broke free from her mother, ran toward Maggie, threw arms around her waist. Thank you for saving my daddy. He said you're an angel, a real one. Maggie looked down. Blonde curls, blue eyes, 6 years old maybe. Reminded her painfully of photographs of Jacob at the same age. What's your name, sweetheart? Emma Hartwell, Dennis's daughter, the youngest. Maggie knelt, took Emma's small face in her hands. Your daddy was very brave, and he loved you very, very much. Remember that, okay? No matter what happens, remember that. Emma nodded, then reached into her pocket. A crayon drawing, house, sun, stick figures. I made this for you so you won't be lonely anymore. Maggie took it, held it to her chest, and finally, let herself cry. 1 month later, Maggie stood on her porch and watched the horizon fill with thunder. They came from every direction, north from Reno, south from Vegas, east from Salt Lake, west from Sacramento, groups of 10, 20, 50, motorcycles catching morning sun like a chrome river flowing toward her farm. 4,000. She'd thought Dexter was exaggerating when he called. We're coming back. Everyone who contributed, everyone who heard your story, everyone who believes good people deserve good things. 4,000 seemed impossible, but here they were. Dexter reached her first, swung off his Harley, removed his helmet, climbed porch steps with a grin that transformed his scarred face. Mrs. Dunning, Mr. Reynolds, told you we'd be back. You said some of your brothers. This seems like rather more than some. He laughed, full and warm. Word got around. The next hours passed in organized chaos. She'd expected a visit, a thank you, maybe a barbecue. What she got was resurrection. Crews attacked broken fences with hammers and nails. Others swarmed over the house, repainting siding, replacing windows, fixing the roof leak she'd ignored for 2 years. Electricians rewired the barn. Plumbers replaced rusted pipes. Carpenters rebuilt the sagging porch. Someone brought a commercial generator and industrial kitchen. By noon, the smell of grilling meat filled the air. Mama Rosa commanded a crew of 20, feeding the army. Maggie wandered through it all like a ghost at her own party. Mrs. Dunning, Tyler Brennan approaching, walking with only a slight limp. You're looking at a miracle. Me. Your work. Doctors said your field surgery was some of the cleanest they'd seen. Said if you'd done anything different, I'd have lost the leg. I just did what your grandfather taught my husband. Saving lost causes runs in your family. He hugged her, careful, gentle. Thank you. At 4 o'clock, Dexter found her watching children learn to make daisy chains from the bikers. There's something we'd like to show you. In the barn. She followed him across the yard, through the crowd that parted respectfully as she passed. The barn doors had been closed all day. Dexter opened them. Maggie stepped inside and stopped. The barn had been transformed. Old horse stalls gone. In their place, small, comfortable rooms separated by wooden partitions, each with a bed, dresser, reading lamp. At the far end, a common area with couches, television, kitchenette. But that wasn't what stopped her breath. The walls were covered in photographs, bikers, families. Children, grandparents, people of every age, each labeled with name and date, each showing someone smiling, alive, who had made it through. These are the people whose lives you touched, Dexter said quietly. The 47 men you saved, their families, their children, grandchildren who will exist because you opened your door. Maggie walked forward in a daze. We want to propose something. Dexter handed her a folder. The club's been talking about what to do with the extra money. Inside, a document, official, legal, the Margaret Dunning Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping veterans with PTSD, housing, counseling, support systems, a place to go when the world gets too heavy. Veterans, like Jacob. We want to use this barn as the first facility. Proper renovation, plumbing, heating, everything. Hire staff. Create a program that actually works. Dexter took her hands. And we want you to be the director. I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than anyone. You know what it's like to watch someone you love disappear into darkness. You know what it's like to want to help and not know how. You know what it's like to lose. His voice dropped. But you also know what it's like to find your way back, to choose life when everything screams to give up. That's what these veterans need, not doctors with degrees, someone who understands, someone who's been to the edge and come back. Maggie looked at the photographs, at the rooms built where Dennis had died, where Jacob had died. I can't bring Jacob back. No, none of us can bring back the people we've lost. Dexter's voice rough with his own grief. But maybe we can save the next one, and the next. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Keep saving people until the scales start to balance. Promise me you'll try. Yes, she said, I'll do it. The cheer from outside shook the walls. That evening, as the sun set over Nevada, Maggie stood on her porch watching the celebration continue. Music playing, people dancing, children asleep in their parents' arms while bikers held them with heartbreaking tenderness. Dexter appeared beside her. 2 bottles of water. "I never properly thanked you," she said, "for keeping your promise." "You don't need to thank me. You saved my brothers. You saved me in ways I'm still figuring out." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge. "I told you about Emily and Sarah. What I didn't tell you was how close I came to following them, how many times I held my gun." Long drink of water. "What stopped me was finding people who needed me, a purpose. The club, but it took years." He turned to look at her. "When I saw you on that porch, I knew. You were fighting the same battle, looking for a reason to stay." "I was. And now?" Maggie looked at her farm, repaired, restored, reimagined, at the photographs in the barn, at 4,000 people who'd traveled across the country to show her she mattered. "Now I have more reasons than I can count." Dexter smiled, the smile she'd seen on Walter's face in her dream. "Good, that's good." He reached into his vest. "This came in the mail yesterday, addressed to you. A crayon drawing. House, sun, stick figures. On the back in careful childish writing. Thank you for helping my daddy not be alone. Love, Emma." Maggie held it to her chest. "I'm going to frame this. First thing people see when they walk in." "Why?" "Because it reminds me why we're doing this." She looked up at the stars. "We can't save everyone, can't undo what's done, but we can make sure no one faces the darkness alone." Dexter nodded slowly. "That's exactly right. That's exactly what Jacob would have wanted." The celebration continued into the night. Maggie stayed on her porch, watching, listening, feeling life pulse through her property in ways she'd never imagined. Tomorrow, she would begin. Phone calls, papers, building the program that would bear her name. Honoring her son by saving other mothers' sons. But tonight, she simply existed, simply breathed, simply lived. And for the first time in 3 years, that was enough. The sign at the entrance to the property had weathered 5 Nevada summers, but the words remained clear. Maggie's Barn. A Margaret Dunning Foundation program. No one faces the darkness alone. Beneath it in smaller letters, Est 2012. 112 lives saved. The number changed every few months. Someone had to climb a ladder and repaint the figure. Maggie insisted on doing it herself, even at 69 years old, even when her knees protested and Rosa scolded her for being stubborn. "It's my count," she always said, "my responsibility." 112. 112 veterans who had come to the farm, broken, hollow, ready to end their stories the same way Jacob had ended his. 112 men and women who had found something in this place, in the converted barn, in the garden, in the steady presence of an old woman who understood, that gave them a reason to stay. Not all of them made it. 3 names were etched on a memorial stone behind the barn, beside the oak tree where Walter and Jacob rested. 3 who had slipped through despite everything. Maggie visited that stone every morning, spoke their names aloud, promised to do better. But 112 had lived, had healed, had gone back into the world with tools they didn't have before. That was the count that mattered. The morning of the 5th anniversary began like every other. Maggie woke at 5, made coffee, sat on the porch watching stars fade. The farmhouse was quiet. She still lived alone in the main building, though the property now included 3 additional structures: the original barn converted to housing, a new therapy center funded by the second wave of donations, and a workshop where veterans learned carpentry and metalwork. 6 full-time staff, 12 volunteers on rotation. A waiting list that broke her heart every time she looked at it. Not enough beds, never enough beds, but more than there had been, more than 0. She was reviewing intake files when the first motorcycle appeared on Highway 93, then another, and another. By 7 o'clock, the horizon was filling with thunder. They came every year on the anniversary. Not 4,000, that had been a one-time miracle, impossible to replicate, but hundreds, sometimes 1,000, enough to fill her fields with chrome and leather, enough to remind her that she wasn't alone, had never been alone since that night 5 years ago when she'd opened her door to strangers. Dexter arrived first, as always. 52 now, gray threading through his beard, but still massive, still commanding, still looking at her like she was something sacred. "Mrs. Dunning." "Mr. Reynolds, you're early." Wanted to beat the traffic. He climbed the porch steps, envelope in hand. Annual report from the foundation board. Thought you'd want to see it before the ceremony. She took the envelope, but didn't open it. Numbers could wait. People couldn't. How's Tyler? Good. Real good. He's bringing his wife this year. They're expecting. A baby? Due in October. They're naming her Margaret if it's a girl. Maggie's eyes stung. She blinked it away. That's too much. It's not enough. Nothing's ever enough. Dexter sat beside her on the porch swing, the wood creaking under his weight. But it's something. They sat in comfortable silence, watching motorcycles stream onto the property, watching volunteers direct traffic, set up tables, prepare for the crowd, watching the foundation she'd built with trembling hands and borrowed courage come alive for another year. I've been thinking, Dexter said eventually, about that first night. The ambush. After. When I showed up at your door. When you had every reason to turn us away and didn't. He stared at his hands, scarred and weathered. I've been trying to figure out what made you do it, all these years, and I still don't have an answer. Maggie considered the question. She'd been asked it 100 times, by journalists, by donors, by the veterans who came through her program. She'd given 100 different answers, all of them true, none of them complete. You want to know the real reason? If you're willing to tell it. She looked out at the desert, at the mountains on the horizon, at the land her family had worked for 4 generations. The night before Jacob died, he stood in my doorway, 2 a.m, and I knew something was wrong. I could see it in his eyes, but I was tired, so tired, and I told myself it could wait until morning. She'd told this story before, but not all of it, not the part that came next. What I never told anyone was what happened after I found him, after the ambulance came and went and left me alone in this house with nothing but silence and guilt. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I went to the kitchen. I took Walter's revolver out of the safe, and I sat at the table for 6 hours, trying to decide whether to follow him. Dexter was very still beside her. I didn't, obviously, but not because I wanted to live, because I was a coward, too scared to pull the trigger, too broken to put the gun away. So I just existed. For 3 years, I existed, waiting for something to tip the scales one way or the other. She turned to look at him, and then you showed up, bleeding on my porch, begging for help, and for the first time in 3 years, someone needed me. Someone's life depended on what I did in the next 5 minutes. And I thought. She paused, searching for words. I thought, if I can't save myself, maybe I can save them. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's a reason to stick around. Not for me, but for the people I might help if I stayed. Dexter's eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. And was it? Enough? Maggie looked at the sign by the entrance, at the number that would need updating again soon. It became enough, slowly. One veteran at a time, one life at a time. Every person who walked out of that barn breathing when they'd wanted to stop, they added something to the scales. They made the choice to stay a little easier. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the bronze chip Dexter had given her 5 years ago, worn smooth now, the edges rounded from years of handling. You gave me this, told me to remember that someone survived, that someone who lost everything found new reasons to live. I remember. I didn't believe it then, not really, but I kept it anyway, kept touching it, kept reminding myself that survival was possible, even when I couldn't imagine how. She pressed the chip into his hand. I don't need it anymore. I've got my own reasons now, but someone else might need it, someone who's sitting at their kitchen table at 3 a.m, trying to decide whether to stay. Dexter looked at the chip, then at her, then at the crowd filling her property, the hundreds of people who had come to celebrate what she'd built. You know what you are, Mrs. Dunning? Old, tired, stubborn. A miracle. His voice was thick. You're a goddamn miracle. The ceremony started at noon. They held it in front of the barn, where a small stage had been erected, chairs arranged in rows filled with bikers and donors and veterans and families, children running between legs, too young to understand the gravity, but old enough to feel the love. Maggie took the stage alone. She'd written a speech, 12 drafts, each one worse than the last. In the end, she'd thrown them all away. Words on paper couldn't capture what she needed to say. 5 years ago, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. I was ready to die. Silence. Absolute. My husband was gone. My son was gone. My farm was being taken. I had a revolver on my kitchen table and a letter written to no one, and I was counting down the days until I could stop hurting. She let that sit. Let them feel it. And then, at 3 a.m, 48 strangers showed up on my porch, bleeding, hunted, desperate, and they asked me for help. She found Dexter in the crowd, found Tyler beside him, arm around his pregnant wife, found Mike Brennan, gray-haired and tearful, found the faces of men she'd stitched back together with veterinary supplies and borrowed hope. I didn't help them because I was brave. I helped them because I was broken, because I'd lost my son to the same darkness that was chasing them, because I thought, if I couldn't save Jacob, maybe I could save someone else's Jacob. Maybe that would be enough to make my life mean something. Her voice cracked. She let it. It wasn't supposed to be a foundation. It wasn't supposed to be a program. It was supposed to be one night, one choice, one door open to strangers who had nowhere else to go. She gestured at the buildings around her, at the barn transformed into shelter, at the lives rebuilt within its walls. But here's what I learned. One choice leads to another. One life saved creates ripples. One person who decides to stay instead of leave, they become someone else's reason to stay. And that person becomes someone else's. And on, rippling outward forever. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. The crayon drawing Emma Hartwell had given her 5 years ago, faded now, colors bleeding together, but still legible. A little girl gave me this the day of my foreclosure hearing. She said it was so I wouldn't be lonely anymore. Her father died in my barn that night, died while I held his hand and promised help was coming. She held up the drawing. Emma is 11 now. She writes me letters every month, tells me about school, about her friends, about the boys she has a crush on. She says she wants to be a nurse when she grows up because she wants to help people the way I helped her daddy. Maggie's voice steadied, strengthened. That's why we do this, not for the numbers, although the numbers matter, not for the recognition, although recognition brings funding, and funding saves lives. We do this because of Emma, because every veteran we save is someone's father, someone's mother, someone's child. Every life we preserve ripples outward into futures we'll never see. She looked at the crowd, at the sea of faces, some crying, some smiling, all listening. 5 years ago, I was ready to die. Today, I'm ready to live. And I'm asking you, all of you, to help me keep going, to spread the word, to donate what you can, to volunteer your time, to be the person who opens the door when someone shows up desperate at 3 a.m. She folded the drawing carefully, returned it to her pocket. Because here's the truth I've learned. Saving others saves yourself. Every time you reach out to someone in darkness, you light a candle in your own. Every time you refuse to let someone face their demons alone, you weaken the demons facing you. Final breath, final words. My son Jacob couldn't be saved. I'll carry that grief until I die, but his death led me here, led me to 48 strangers who became family, led me to a purpose I never expected, led me to 112 lives that might have ended but didn't. She looked at the memorial stone, visible through the crowd, at the names etched there, Walter, Jacob, and the 3 veterans she couldn't save. I can't bring them back, but I can honor them by saving the ones I can. And that has become enough, more than enough. That has become everything. The applause lasted 4 minutes. Maggie stood on the stage, tears streaming down her face, watching 400 people rise to their feet, watching bikers who looked like they'd stepped out of nightmares crying openly, watching veterans she'd saved applauding with hands that had once held guns to their own heads. Dexter was first to reach her when she stepped down. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his massive arms around her and held on. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, "for everything." "Thank you," she whispered back, "for not letting me give up." The celebration continued until midnight, music and food and laughter filling the desert air, children falling asleep in their parents' arms, veterans telling stories by the bonfire, their voices mixing with the crackle of flames and the distant hum of motorcycles. Maggie slipped away around 11. found her way to the memorial stone behind the barn, sat down in the grass, her aging body protesting, and looked at the names carved in granite: Walter James Dunning, 1943 to 2011, Jacob Thomas Dunning, 1974-2009, and below them, smaller, the three she couldn't save: Marcus Webb, 2013, Jennifer Santos, 2015, David Chen, 2016. "I'm sorry," she told them, the way she did every morning. "I'm sorry I couldn't help you. I'm sorry I wasn't enough." The stars didn't answer. They never did. But the silence didn't feel like accusation anymore. It felt like acceptance, like understanding, like the quiet company of souls who had forgiven her long before she learned to forgive herself. "I'm going to keep going," she said, "for as long as I can, for as many as I can, I promise." She sat there for a long time, listening to the celebration she'd accidentally created, feeling the weight of 5 years, 5 years of survival, of purpose, of meaning she'd never expected to find. The revolver was still in the safe. She'd never gotten rid of it. Some days she thought about taking it out, holding it, remembering how close she'd come, but she never did. It had become a symbol, not of the death she'd almost chosen, but of the life she'd chosen instead. The letter had burned years ago. She'd watched it turn to ash and felt something release inside her, some knot finally untying. Footsteps in the grass. She didn't turn. "Mrs. Dunning?" Young voice, nervous. She looked up. A young man, maybe 25, standing a few feet away. Lean, haunted, with the 1,000-yard stare she recognized instantly. "Yes? I'm supposed to check in tomorrow, for the program." He twisted his hands together. "But I was driving past and I saw the lights and I thought—" "I don't know what I thought." Maggie patted the grass beside her. "Sit down." He sat, close enough that she could see the tremor in his hands, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his gaze kept flicking to the memorial stone. "What's your name?" "Ryan Mitchell." "What branch?" "Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan." "When did you get out?" 18 months ago." His voice cracked. "Feels like yesterday. Feels like forever." Maggie nodded slowly. She'd heard this story 100 times. It never got easier. It never should. "Why are you here, Ryan?" "The real reason." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I've got a gun in my car. Loaded. I was going to drive out into the desert tonight and—" He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Maggie reached out and took his hand. His skin was cold, trembling. "I was going to do the same thing," she said. 5 years ago. Sat at my kitchen table with my husband's revolver, trying to find the courage to pull the trigger." He looked at her, surprised, disbelieving. "You?" "Me. Lost my husband to cancer. Lost my son to the same darkness you're carrying. Lost everything I thought mattered." She squeezed his hand. "I was ready to quit, Ryan. Ready to stop hurting. Ready to stop existing." "What changed?" She looked at the celebration still going on beyond the barn, at the lights and laughter and life she'd accidentally built. "Someone needed me. 48 strangers showed up on my porch, bleeding and desperate, and they needed me. And I thought, if I can't save myself, maybe I can save them. Maybe that's enough." Was it? Eventually, not right away. It took time. It took work. It took learning that saving others is how you save yourself. She turned to face him fully. "You came here tonight because something in you isn't ready to give up. Something in you saw these lights and thought, maybe there's another way." Tears were streaming down his face now. He didn't wipe them away. "I don't know how to stop hurting." "Neither did I, but I learned, and you can too." She stood, her knees protesting, and offered him her hand. "Come inside. Have some food. Meet some people who've been where you are, and tomorrow we'll start figuring out how to help you carry what you're carrying." He stared at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it. Maggie led Ryan toward the celebration, toward the light and noise and life, toward the 100 people who would welcome him without judgment, who would understand his pain without needing it explained, who would hold space for his healing however long it took. Behind her, the memorial stone stood silent under the stars. Walter, Jacob, Marcus, Jennifer, David, 5 names, 5 losses, 5 reasons to give up, and in front of her 112 reasons to keep going, soon to be 113. Epilogue. 1 week later. The ladder wobbled slightly as Maggie climbed it, can of white paint in hand. "Mrs. Dunning, please let me do that." Rosa standing below, hands on hips. "It's my count. You're 69 years old, which means I've been climbing ladders for 69 years. I know what I'm doing." Rosa muttered something in Spanish that Maggie pretended not to hear. She reached the sign, dipped her brush in the paint, carefully covered the old number and painted the new one. 113 lives saved. 113 people who had come to this farm broken and left whole, or at least more whole than they'd arrived. 113 futures that now existed because a 64-year-old widow had opened her door to strangers. Maggie climbed down, handed the paint can to Rosa, and stood back to admire her work. The sign caught the morning light. Maggie's Barn, a Margaret Dunning Foundation program. No one faces the darkness alone. Esther 2012, 113 lives saved. Behind her, the barn hummed with activity, veterans eating breakfast in the common area, therapy sessions beginning in the new building. The workshop already loud with saws and hammers as men and women learned to build things with their hands. In front of her, the highway stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, another veteran was struggling. Another family was breaking. Another person was sitting at their kitchen table at 3 a.m, holding something deadly, trying to decide. She couldn't save them all. She knew that. Some would slip through no matter what she did. Some darkness was too deep. But she could save some, one at a time, day by day, life by life. That was enough. That was everything. Maggie walked to the memorial stone one last time, knelt in the grass, her knees complaining, pressed her palm against the cool granite. 113, Jacob, she whispered. I'm still counting. I'll never stop counting. The wind stirred the desert grass. Somewhere in the barn, someone laughed. Maggie smiled, stood, wiped the dust from her knees, and walked back toward the light. The end.